Good morning, folks. Thank you very much for tuning in to News at Ben. It's been a big week for news this week, a lot of it to do with the criminal justice system, which I'd like to talk about a bit, but also about this nonsense over the slave trade, which I think, as eyebrow-raisingly stupid as it might seem to you, is actually quite a serious subject. And then lastly, I'd like to talk about the development that our Prime Minister wishes to get closer and closer to Europe as far as our defence is concerned. And that might, on the face of it, seem to be a sensible idea given the geopolitical uncertainty we all face. But actually, like so many things with our government, it should be something we should be very worried and concerned about. But let's just look at the criminal justice news last week. The news kicked off, of course, with the sad death of Peter Lynch, who had been convicted of violence in the riots that followed the tragic deaths in Southport. And the charge against Peter was that he had been violent, but the evidence offered up against him was, as far as I could see, solely relating to what he said to the police, which was, I guess, abusive at a certain level. Some of it wasn't even abusive. And what he wrote on a placard, which looked like sort of conspiracy theory ramblings to me, neither of which constituted a crime in this country, as far as I'm aware, and certainly not a crime worthy of 2 years and 8 months in jail. But apparently he pleaded guilty to the charge of violence and then, for reasons which are not clear, died in prison. And the three things I'd like to ask the police as far as his case is concerned, and I think three things the police must answer, is what was the evidence against him for violence? What was it that he did that was violent that required them to charge him with violence? Secondly, did he have proper legal representation when he pleaded guilty? Because it seems to me the evidence would have pointed him towards pleading not guilty. And then thirdly, how is it that he came to die in prison? Why are the police not being clear on the causes of his death? That surely should be made public. No one should die in prison and the circumstances of their death not be made clear. And this, of course, all happened in stark contrast to what was also going on last week from a criminal justice perspective, which was the early release from prison of known, convicted, repeat violent criminals. You couldn't really have a starker contrast. A man convicted and dies in jail because of stuff he said and put on a placard, and at the same time as known violent criminals are being released into the populace. And we know for sure that these violent criminals will commit more crime. And what do you think the message is that it sends to criminals in this country, or would-be criminals in this country, that we release people early from jail? This is roughly, I think, how they would interpret it. They would think, well, if we commit a crime, there's a very small chance we'll be apprehended. And if we are apprehended, there's a pretty small chance of us being charged. And if we are charged, there's a chance, I guess, we'll go to jail. But even if we go to jail, guess what, folks? They're going to release us early. So it's open days for criminals. It's an invitation to those who are considering being criminal to come out, be criminal. Because actually, if you're arrested, charged, convicted, we're going to release you early. Nothing could be worse. And it's not as if crime is already under control in this country. The reason they're being released is because our jails are full. Criminality is on the up. Knife crime up dramatically over the last 10 years, as is all other form of criminal behaviour. We see it on our streets. We smell weed every 5 yards. We see a multiplicity of barbershops, vaping shops, nail bars, not all, a significant number, money laundering on behalf of the criminality that we experience. So here we are in this country, putting in jail people who say things with which the police disagree, and releasing from jail people who we know to be known, convicted, violent criminals. And all the time, There are also 10,000 convicted criminals in jail, 10,000 out of 100,000 in total that are in jail at the moment, who are foreigners. Foreigners clogging up 10% of our jail space, costing us £50,000 per head per annum. That's 500 million for the 10,000 who are in jail, 500 million pounds per annum, who shouldn't be in this country, who should be deported. The death of Peter Lynch in jail, the early release of known violent criminals, and the continued expenditure and blocking up of spaces on foreign criminals convicted of crimes in our country absolutely spells out how our criminal justice system is broken. The second thing I want to talk about is this claim for reparations by Commonwealth countries against the United Kingdom. Let's just be clear on one thing. All the victims of the slave trade are dead. All those who perpetrated the slave trade are dead. There's no one from whom to collect reparations and no one to pay them to. They're all dead. The discussion over reparations is born out of two forces. The first force, I think, is a homegrown force, a force that we seem to have in the United Kingdom, a force that hates the United Kingdom, that would do away with the United Kingdom. And the reason they want to have the discussion about reparations is because they recognise that if they can make the country ashamed of its past, we lose our legitimacy as a country, and they can attack the very existence of the United Kingdom. And yes, that might sound hyperbolic, but that is precisely what their aim is. Their aim is to diminish the legitimacy of the United Kingdom and thereby attack us. And actually, our very weak Prime Minister, whom I'm afraid I have accused of being anti-British in the past and will accuse them of being anti-British again, because instead of standing up to these false claims that we should be paying reparations, instead of standing up against them, he's giving succor to it and is being prepared to have the discussion. What he should say is that actually we're proud of our history when it comes to the slave trade. We were the first country at the zenith of our power to shut down the slave trade. We then went on to abolish the very ownership of slaves, and then to police the high seas at vast human and economic cost to shut down the trade itself. We should be proud of our history when it comes to the slave trade, but we have an anti-British, weak Prime Minister who will not speak up for the nation. And the second reason these Commonwealth countries want to have this discussion is because, of course, they smell money. They smell a weak Prime Minister, and they can smell that an ideology of anti-Britishness has taken grip of the country, and they can make money out of it, either through forgiveness in foreign debt obligations or in further foreign aid from this country, or some other means by which they can milk the United Kingdom. And these Commonwealth countries, many of them are themselves guilty of having traded slaves in the past, some of whom are actually still trading slaves, and yet they have the audacity to want and demand a discussion on reparations. Our Prime Minister, if he had any guts, would simply say no. The third topic, which I think is very important and has been revealed clearly this week by the Prime Minister, is his what he calls close military cooperation with Europe. He says we need this because of the geopolitical dangers the world now faces. A regional war potentially in the Middle East. Actually, we've got a regional war in the Middle East already, and obviously the war against Russia in Ukraine. He talks about the need for military cooperation with Europe, at the same time is having kicked into the long grass, spending more money, as is desperately needed, on our armed forces. They are a shadow of their former selves. We still, as it happens, have the strongest and best armed forces in Europe, but that is a low bar. And what we desperately need to be doing is spending money on them. But instead of spending money on the armed forces, what he's doing is sidling up to Europe. And the sidling up that he's doing to Europe is pernicious. And the reason I say it's pernicious is because he wants us to work in an interoperable way with Europe. He wants our armed forces to be enmeshed into the military structures of Europe. Same software, same hardware, same command structures. That is what he means by cooperation with Europe. What he is in effect doing is taking the British military and making it interdependent and therefore dependent on military armed forces. And the result of that, ladies and gentlemen, will be that we will be under the direction of Brussels. This is not like NATO, where member states of NATO come together and decide collectively what action they wish to take. This will be the United Kingdom becoming enmeshed in the European Defence Union and unable to act unilaterally. And let me tell you, the Europeans get foreign policy wrong repeatedly, often, and I would say virtually without exception. We do not want to be enmeshed in the European Defence Union. So 3 things this week that the Prime Minister needs to get a grip of: our criminal justice system, this notion that we should be paying reparations for the slave trade. He needs to get behind the United Kingdom, and he needs to get behind our military and not allow it to be taken over by Europe. 3 really important things, and I hope I haven't made you too depressed on Sunday. So last but not least, I wish you a good breakfast if you haven't had one, and certainly a good lunch if you've gone without breakfast, and a happy Sunday. Thank you very much indeed for listening.